Alright everybody, dancingsean here. We're looking into the second season of The Boys. Before I dive too deep into it, I want to go over a little bit of the tentpole moments of the first season. For those of you who maybe saw the first season a year ago, or some crazy person who might want to skip the first season and go right to the second season. What this story fundamentally is about a world where superheroes are real and kind of a realistic take on how that might affect the world, the type of infrastructure and the way governments would be affected, and how powers might be corrupted. All the superheroes aren't always going to be good, perfect people. And you can see how corporations might try to take advantage of it. Our story starts in the first season with Huey, one of the central characters. His girlfriend is killed by a superhero in an accident, maybe a reckless, not a pure accident, but a reckless action by one of the supes, as they call them. There are 7 central superheroes, a group called the Seven in this world, and they're modeled after the Justice League, but they're sort of evil versions, we'll say, corrupted versions. And A-Train, the parallel to the Flash, runs through Huey's girlfriend. And that sets off a series of events. A character named Billy Butcher, who has it out for Homelander. He's a Superman equivalent, and he raped Butcher's wife in the past, so he's on his quest for vengeance. Now the world thinks of the superheroes as being good guys, and this is a central theme of the show, is what it means to be a hero, and maybe concepts of identity in general. Now Huey gets drawn into this group, the Boys. The title of the show is this group of characters who are out to get revenge or show the world that the superheroes aren't what they really think they are. There's an organization called Vought that manages the superheroes, and they are, kind of almost a stereotypical evil corporate entity. And there's sort of a symbiotic relationship between them and the superheroes. And Billy Butcher recruits Huey because he also has a reason to seek revenge. Huey kind of gets in over his head pretty quickly when he realizes the danger that's involved and the level of conspiracy that's involved. In the meantime, we have a character, Starlight, sort of a naive young girl who's looked up to these superheroes and wanted to join the Seven, and she gets her chance, but she kind of sees that it's not what she thought. There's this cynical reality. She gets sexually assaulted by one of the superheroes, the Deep. He's the Aquaman equivalent. The Boys end up capturing one of the superheroes, Translucent, who, I don't want to get too caught up in parallels to the comics and everything because I'm trying to analyze this show for what it is, but Translucent can turn invisible. He's indestructible, and they manage to kill him. And that's Huey, in fact, is the one that does it, and it's kind of a point of no return for him. And through the course of the season, the Boys do discover a way that they can get to Vought, that there's this chemical, Compound V, that both Vought used to create the superheroes, and this is kind of secret. Everyone thought the superheroes were born that way, and it was, they were messengers from God or something. And so they've been able to manipulate Christian beliefs in addition to their superpowers and the media and everything else, to kind of get control over elements of society, the government, and of course they would just want more and more power. This Compound V can also be abused, not just by turning kids into superheroes or turning adults into superheroes, but also can be abused by the superheroes. It's a sort of a steroid. And so the Boys kind of uncover this. They find a woman, Kimiko, who had been turned into a superhero, and it turns out it's not just Vought. Vought was more using it to create the superheroes, but Homelander himself was using it to create super villains. He was giving it to terrorist organizations in order to increase the need that the U.S. government had for superheroes and for Vought. If they're super bad guys, hey, you need us super good guys to fight them. You should put us in the army. All this culminates with a showdown between Homelander and Butcher. Butcher thinks that he has found a weakness of Homelander. There's a woman, Madeline, who manages senior management at Vought, close to Homelander, and Homelander just kills Madeline himself, going darker than what Butcher thought his plan was going to be. And it's revealed that Butcher's wife is still alive and has a child, but it's Homelander's child. We're left in a sort of a cliffhanger moment where the boys are running away from both the Seven and the feds, and Starlight saves them. A-Train, who's been abusing Compound V, has just had a heart attack. And that's what brings us into Season 2. The first episode is The Big Ride. There are a couple things that are not quite cliffhangery, but things we expect to be addressed in the second season, like what's going on with the Deep. He was sort of ostracized when it came to light that he had assaulted Starlight, aka Annie, and has assaulted other women too, and it was kind of covered up by Vought. They're kind of trying to hide the Deep away, and his character I have related to a Game of Thrones character, Jaime Lannister, who was presented to us as this awful, terrible person, but slowly as we come to understand him better and he tries to improve himself, it's weird what the show puts you through, making you feel sorry for someone that you're disgusted by. We'll see how they follow up with the Deep. There's another character, Black Noir, who is the Batman equivalent, as far as we could tell, that we know almost nothing about, and I've been speculating what his alter identity might be. And we'll see what kind of follow-up we get in Season 2, whether they reveal his identity or give us anything on him other than he kicks butt fighting, you know. But for the cliffhanger moments, Madeline had a baby, and in this explosion where Butcher planned on killing Madeline himself, but instead Homelander just blows her up, effectively blows her up. But her baby was in a room. So what happened to that baby? We don't even know who that baby's father is. Is A-Train going to live through this heart attack? Is Starlight going to get in trouble for helping out the boys? So are the boys going to get caught with everyone after them? That's what we're leading into here. The opening scene is, I guess, following up on another bit of storyline, is a super terrorist that Homeland created, Nakib. And he has given Vought new leverage over the government, even though they've kind of become aware of, thanks to the boys, of some of the shady things they've been doing, but they have this new leverage. Hey, you need us to fight these super terrorists. And in the opening sequence, we get a good editing segment here, where we're seeing Edgar, who is the head of Vought. By the way, Giancarlo Esposito, he's probably most known from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. And he plays a similar sort of ruthless mastermind character here. And he's meeting with members of the government. It's not 100% clear, but it's probably the Secretary of Defense, maybe of State. And they are kind of hashing out what the nature of superheroes being in the military is going to be. And Edgar is kind of asserting himself in a position that's close to the president. He's saying, hey, the superheroes report to me. And if the superheroes are part of the military and they're the most powerful part of the military by far, it's kind of like he's on level with the president of the United States when it comes to how to deploy the military. And it's hard for the powers to be to argue against it even. And it makes you think about the reality of what the world might be like if there were superheroes, especially if they weren't all perfect Clark Kents and Peter Parkers. But this meeting that Edgar is having is interspliced with an action sequence, which is interesting to kind of start us off with some action. And I felt was a good editing to see the power of the superheroes in action as we're seeing their powers being negotiated by Vought. And Black Noir takes out Nakib. It's the basics of what happens there. And we segue that into a funeral with a funeral for Translucent, the soup that had been killed. And of course, Vought and the soups have a lot of sway over how these stories are presented to the media. One big parallel of this whole show is the idea of celebrity, who and why we should listen to people, how much power they should have, how much the media can be biased or influenced. And so, of course, rather than revealing Translucent had been killed by Huey as part of a cover-up for Compound V and everything, they blame it on the terrorists, this, nameless, evil, bad guy that everyone has to be against. And it's sort of a photo op. The whole funeral is sort of a photo op for Homelander and Vought to just justify their need for power, their quest for vengeance, their loyalty to America. And we move from there to see, incidentally, we see Starlight is side by side with Homelander. She seems to be playing the role that she needs to play for the Seven. And we are fairly certain she's a good guy. So we are, ostensibly, she's just trying to do what she needs to do to not get caught, to maybe still be on the inside to help Huey and the boys out. Maybe she's afraid for her life because Homelander has already threatened to kill her out of suspicion. So she probably is somewhere between, barely not caught, trying to cover things up, afraid for her life, doing what she has to do, whatever they tell her to do at Vought. And we see where Huey is, and he's just in a basement, some den of a drug gang. The boys are similarly trying to not get caught, but they don't necessarily have all the resources and luxury that the Seven, that Starlight gets. They're scraping just to have safety and to be hidden out. And it's another interesting editing piece that they do, the parallel of Starlight getting ready and Huey getting ready. They're about to meet up, apparently, which is kind of risky for both of them. In this intro segment, we get Billy Joel music. If you remember, that was key to Huey's characters. He likes Billy Joel. It was his last words to Robin before she was killed. And they've made a theme of his music, and I would say good use of music generally throughout the whole series. One thing I want to think about, or have you think about, is that speech that Homelander gave as we're leading into the intro of the show, and he's at Translucent's funeral. We kind of know. We're getting a sort of omniscient view of everything that's happening. But think for a moment, if you weren't getting that omniscient view, if you thought of Homelander as being like Superman, if he was a good guy and he was saving the world, the speech that he's giving would be inspiring, and you might even understand and write to your congressman that you want the Supes to be in the military and we have to stop these terrorists. But when you know what's going behind the scenes, it's kind of scary. And I think part of the point of this show is to make you wonder about what kind of stuff goes on behind the scenes in the real world, behind our politicians and our celebrities and our wars and everything. I'll try not to get too political as I discuss this, but I think it is part of the point of the show, and it gets my mind spinning that way. So we get to, through this montage, we see the A-Train is on a sort of a life support system, so he's alive, but he's not exactly running around, no pun intended, saving the day or spoiling the day for a hero or an anti-hero, as the case may be. And we also become aware from a news report that Madeline's baby was found alive. Another thing I like about the show in general is they make good use of modern media, whether it be, people looking at their phones or live feeds on Instagram or the news. It's a good way to keep us abreast of pieces of the plot, to let us know what's going on in the world, what the population thinks about what's going on, and it helps avoid the characters having too much contrived dialogue just trying to explain what's happening. That said, I will point out that sometimes a little bit of contrived dialogue can be okay. I think it can be overdone, and it can be done better or worse. But there's a movie called Thank You for Smoking, and it's basically it's about a lawyer who represents tobacco companies, and it's a very interesting, thought-provoking movie. I highly recommend it. And there was one segment where he's meeting with, I think it was Robert Downey Jr. Interesting, this movie came out, I think, long before this new wave of superhero stuff was happening, and it had Harvey Dent, or Two-Face. He was the lawyer, and I mean, he wasn't actually Harvey Dent, but he was playing a lawyer in this movie, Thank You for Smoking, and he was meeting with Robert Downey Jr., who was like a movie producer, and he was trying to convince him to put cigarettes back in movies. He was hearkening back to the day of, John Wayne and Clark Gable, classic movie stars would smoke, and that doesn't happen anymore, and for promotion purposes, hey, can we do that? what's your next movie? Can we have Brad Pitt and Angela Jolie light up in space, And the guy's like, that's what Robert Downey Jr. is kind of pitching. And he's like, well, wouldn't that be like oxygen? Wouldn't it explode? And Robert Downey Jr. is like, one line of dialogue. We'll cover that. Don't worry about it. And it really kind of stuck with me that a lot of times I'll want to complain about contrived dialogue, but I understand sometimes it's necessary to let the audience know what's going on, especially in a TV show, and especially in the earlier era of TV shows. Nowadays, you don't have to wait a week. You can and typically do watch multiple episodes in a row, but in the old days of TV, when you had to wait a week for the next episode or a year for the next season, it was a little more important to remind the viewer where you were at in a show or who a character was, things like that. And sometimes they would have a little bit of contrived dialogue to do that. But sometimes there's some piece of physics or some character who's not behaving properly or some storyline that was dropped off or not addressed. And a lot of times that irks me. A lot of times in the back of my mind, some of these things that happen, they don't quite make sense. They kind of pull me out of what's happening in the whole show. And sometimes one line of dialogue to address it will satiate my concerns. And I feel like they did a little bit of that here with Huey and Starlight trying to meet up. We know that everyone is tracking them down. Everyone's out to get them. We see on the news that they're wanted. We know that that Homelander knows who they are. And so the idea of him going to meet with her is like, how can you be doing this? And they give us a couple lines of dialogue like, oh, I'm on a burner phone. Hey, I threw away the SIM card. I feel like they do a decent job of covering the bases, if you will, with some single lines of dialogue. Anyway, sorry about that tangent. Let me get on with the happenings of this episode, which, by the way, I meant to say this earlier on, but the main happenings of this episode, I would say, were some new characters and some new roles for established characters. So we'll get into that here with... excuse me, the idea of, well, I want to say something about the role of characters, I guess, is that Butcher, we saw in the prior season that Butcher kind of was brought into this revenge by an FBI agent that revealed to him that his wife had been raped and he thought murdered by Homelander, and that sent him on his quest of revenge. And you kind of realize that this FBI agent kind of created Butcher, who is in some ways a protagonist, but he is a murderous, dark, vengeful, selfish character. Try to make him charismatic, but man, I don't like him. I don't know what the popular opinion on him is, but I really don't like him. And but he kind of blames who he is at this moment on this Mallory character. And then we see him doing the same thing to Huey. He's brought Huey in on this mission of revenge. Well, now we see Huey bringing Starlight in. And it was an interesting moment happens with the character Mother's Milk. He's one of the boys who is... At this point, Butcher is separate from the boys. We're not sure where he is. Last we saw him, he was with Homelander, lucky to be alive. And the boys are just hiding out. And Butcher and Mother's Milk is worried about Huey trying to meet up with Starlight. And when Butcher was upset by this, it was because he was just prejudiced against all soups. They're all bad. We've got to stop them all. We've got to kill them all. And he was a little more single-minded in his revenge, maybe seeing Huey have some success or seeing a soup in a positive light. He just couldn't accept or deal with that, and he was very against Huey's relationship with Starlight. And Mother's Milk seems to be that way at first, but then you realize he's actually not jealous or self-centered here. He's actually worried about Starlight. He's actually realizing, Huey, you're putting her in danger, man. You got to be careful. You don't realize what you're getting into, what you're getting her into. And it was the first time I really felt I cared that much about Mother's Milk. He's been like a tertiary character. We haven't got too much personality or motivation from him. And I like to see that little bit of insight and reveal from his character. So another totally new character we see here is Gekko. Huey has set Starlight up to basically blackmail this character, Gekko. He can regrow his limbs. That's his superpower, and it seems like Vought just uses him to experiment on, and it seems like he has a side gig of selling his body to people who just want to be violent, like someone chop his arm off for $500 or something, and that type of activity might not be seen well by the public or by Vought, and so Starlight gets it on film. She's going to blackmail him if he doesn't get her a Compound V sample. So that's the storyline we've got going on in the background. Another couple new characters here we have as part of the Deep's storyline. We see that he's kind of spiraling out of control. He's turning to alcohol, and he's been put in jail. And a character, Eagle, this sort of archer superhero. I imagine he's got super strength and power, indestructible, and good aim with his bow and arrow. And he bails the Deep out. And he's trying to address Deep's issues. Deep maybe is trying to address them himself, not very well, but he's got issues of self-esteem. We've seen that several of the superhero characters had rough upbringings at best. And you can see how Deep might have some issues in his life, not knowing how to behave. We don't necessarily want to excuse his behavior, but he seems to be trying to address it with the help of this Eagle character and Carol. And this is kind of confusing because something the show is doing, I think, is trying to give the Deep redemption, but they're mixing it up with cult of sorts. And so we're not sure if the redemption is going to work or work for the right reasons. It's an interesting sequence that's unfolding here. But I kind of expect this Carol character and her cult, if you will, and maybe Eagle to play more of a role as things go. We see, going back to the happenings of Homelander and the Seven. Homelander has brought Ashley. She was a PR rep. She interacted with Starlight in the first season. And that's something you got to wonder about when Homelander kills Madeline, who's a central character in Vought. Who's going to take her place? Ashley is. And there was one really interesting thing that I noticed was they often will have... I've got to start paying more attention to it in general, because often Homelander, and I even wonder, there's probably some thoughts out there about body language and manipulative personalities or whatever, but Homelander also often turns his back on people. When he's interacting with someone, he'll just walk past them and continue to talk to them without making eye contact. And as he does this, sometimes the camera will be on his face and we'll see the person behind him, but sometimes it'll be on his back and we'll see the person that's addressing him. And there was a moment where we see his interactions with Ashley, and she'll say something that upsets him and he'll grimace, but then when he turns to face her, he lights up with a smile. And there's another moment when so we kind of know that he has this ability to put on his game face, if you will, and behave the way he's supposed to. We see this all the time from him. It's almost part of his superpowers to keep his cool, to maintain his presence, even when crazy, weird, negative things are going on around him. He is just always in control of the situation, it seems. And when she says that she's delighted that she has found a new member for the Seven, at that moment the camera is facing his back. You can't see his face, but with the context of knowing that he'll have a different facial expression when people can't see than when he turns to face him, you see his shoulders slump a little, and you know that behind her he's just simmering. But when he turns to face her, he's like, "Oh, great! Let's go see this new person. Good to hear, a new person for the Seven. Let's see who you picked out." And they go to see, and it's another new character, we think, maybe for the season, but I'm not so sure now, because this character is blind, and he's demonstrating his abilities. But Homelander apparently has no patience. He reveals quite a bit of himself to Ashley in a scary moment that we've seen as viewers a number of times, but she did not know what she was getting into, and he just slaps the ears to the point that he's bleeding out on the floor. He just won't accept someone with a handicap to be part of the Seven. He has a prejudice, it seems, and he will not accept Ashley making a decision about who's going to be on the Seven. It's his decision to make. And it seems like with Madeline out of the way, Homelander is kind of opening himself up. He's thinking about things in a new way and putting his foot down and asserting himself, which is scary for this guy who's already so powerful to decide he wants to be more powerful. So we get another new character, Stormfront. So Homelander and Maeve are filming a promo as part of them joining the military with some soldiers, but apparently just actors, not even actually soldiers. And another new member of the Seven shows up, this Stormfront character. And this is another example of the reality of our day-to-day lives being incorporated into this story. She's live streaming it. She's on Instagram showing everyone, making her commentary, and people are like, whoa, it's Homelander and Maeve. It's again, I appreciate it. Kind of makes this world feel more believable when it's like my real world. And again, Homelander here, keeping his cool. He's obviously, from what we've seen already, the idea that a new person on the Seven who decided this, and he's keeping this smile on his face, but we know he's livid. But he's on camera. He can't really do anything about it right now. This character is played by Aya Cash. Stormfront is played by Aya Cash, and she, I know from the show You're the Worst. She's been in some small roles in a bunch of different media, TVs and movies and whatever. But the show You're the Worst, she was the central lead. I think they had 5 seasons in that show, and it was really good. It was it was an irreverent comment, but it got irreverent comedy. And she played a pretty bold, aggressive, no-nonsense character, very similar to what she's playing here. I generally recommend that show. It is very R-rated, and it's, although can be hilarious, it also gets some pretty serious, poignant moments too. But glad to see Aya Cash maybe breaking into another type of role here. So, with that context, Homelander goes to visit Edgar. Edgar has several times been referenced with a sort of reverence. Homelander is like, several times he's gotten direction from Edgar and he just has to do it. It's weird to see him feel subservient to someone, but not anymore. He's going to put his foot down. Edgar stands his ground. It was a very interesting moment where the two of them were kind of angling leverage against each other. Homelander is basically saying, I'm Vought. I can do what I want. You don't get to pick who's on the Seven. I do. And Edgar comes back with, you're not Vought. Vaught's not a superhero company. We're a pharmaceutical company. You don't get this. We don't really need you. Now, I think both of them are right and wrong, but neither of them are going to give in to the other. But for the moment, it seems as though Edgar got the best of him here. And Homelander goes to see his son. I expect to get more follow-up with that, but for the moment, we know that Becca and Homelander's son still seem to be at that same location we saw them last season. In the meantime, back with the boys, we get Kimiko. She was the character that Vought, or Homelander rather, had been experimenting on. She was a terrible, tragic backstory where her and her brother were sort of forced into a terrorist organization as children, and then from there were used as an experiment to become soups. When she's hiding out with the boys, and they are trying to come up with a plan. They've gone to visit their contact with the CIA, Susan. She got killed. Huey has been angling to be the leader since Butcher isn't there. I, again, appreciate some realism, if you will, even if we're in this sort of fantastic world. I still relate to this fantastic world more when the characters in this world behave like I and my friends and people in the real world. We relate often to each other through literature and pop culture, right? Think how many times you talk to your friends about the TV show you watched, the book you read, how much of culture is little excerpts. Without even knowing it, we're quoting Shakespeare or Dickens or whatever. We just talk about Harry Potter in our lives. It's just part of our lives and our culture and our world. It's a point of reference for us. And Huey is doing this when he's trying to pitch himself as a potential leader for the boys in Butcher's absence, and Mother's Milk and Frenchie are kind of blowing him off. When Susan is killed, when they go to meet her, Huey feels guilty about it, and this is an interesting difference, an interesting contrast between him and Butcher, that Huey feels bad. He feels responsible. He feels like he got Susan killed, and it's not completely fair. Like, obviously someone else killed her, and lots of people were involved in the series of events that added up to this moment. But the fact that he feels guilty at all says something about him, as opposed to Butcher, who would just be disappointed he lost a CIA contact. Butcher seems to have no remorse or empathy for anyone at any point. He seems just hell-bent on getting revenge and seems willing to use people like tools, whereas Huey feels bad about someone who was trying to help him being hurt for it. Maybe even makes him second-guess becoming a leader. And, of course, in the middle of all this, Butcher shows up. And we get Billy Joel music to end the episode, and that kind of sets the stage for what's going to happen next. I appreciate the idea that they're maintaining this theme of Billy Joel. I still want to know the details about Madeline's baby. Who was the father? What's going to come of that baby? Does Homelander care about it? He seems to have saved the baby. Not sure what or if anything will happen to that. Also, Black Noir is another character that seems to be, I don't know, central's not the right word, but a part of this story that we're getting, I think, the least details of from anyone. The character that I was supposing that might be his alter ego, Seth, he's one of the PR reps that popped up a couple times, and he was one person and I can't find a definitive reason to eliminate as possibly being Black Noir's alter ego, assuming they even bothered to give him one. He wasn't in this episode, so maybe not. I don't know, maybe they got too many other plots to deal with, but we'll see. Check out next episode when I cover, I think I'm going to get 2, 3, 4 together. They put out 3 episodes all at once. I've been a little behind about the release schedule, but I'm trying to catch up. Follow my Twitter account. I'm dancingsean, and please subscribe to my page. And let me know any kind of feedback you've got. I appreciate it. See you next time.